warned Daddy, I was like, I got 8 pages. He said, we'll start right now. Anyway, so today we're going to finish our study on the life of Abraham. And the last time we covered the familiar story of Abraham and Isaac and Moriah from the angle of repeated test until there's testimony. And we found in that lesson that the God who tests is also the God who provides. And when we have that true faith in God, God proves faithful. And we know that the way to grow that small mustard seed of faith is to exercise it. We talked about like stretching it, like pushing it to the limit. So exercising that is how to grow that small mustard seed. And I've been thinking of it lately like a faith muscle. So think of it like using your faith muscle, building that muscle. So he gives a test. We use faith in that test, or that faith muscle. God proves faithful, and our faith in him increases. It's kind of how it goes. I heard somebody joke once that they had all the faith in the world till they needed it. You know the feeling like you think you got it, and then it's time, and then you fall apart, and you're like, oh yeah,
They had more of a table muscle.
A table muscle, yeah, yeah. So I heard them say that, but it's actually when we're called to have faith in those hard and tough situations, that heavy lifting, since we're thinking of it as a muscle, that heavy lifting, that we truly see how big our faith muscle is. So it's not actually faith until you need it and you exhibit it, right? So that's faith. Dad testified Wednesday night of several examples and times that God called him to faith and giving. And as he used his faith muscle, God proved faithful. I love the story about the cars. That's I really love that, because there's no doubt that was God. And I love those situations. And even us hearing that, but that trains that faith muscle, growing that mustard seed, preparing him for even heavier lifting and harder tests. And that's what we do. We go through those tests, we build that muscle, and then we're able to take a harder test and a harder test and a harder test, and training and preparing. So let's back up all the way to Genesis 21. I wanted to catch just a few important concepts, but we're going to end today in chapter 25 as we do close the story of Abraham. Genesis 21 opens with the birth of Isaac, and y'all probably remember, I read these verses before, but verses 1 through 3 says that the Lord was gracious to Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age at the very time that God had promised him. Abraham gave the name Isaac to the son that Sarah bore him. Now I'm going to drop down into verse 8, because this is where that chapter takes a turn, and I kind of skipped over this part. And it says, the child grew and was weaned, and on the day Isaac was weaned, Abraham held a great feast. But Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abraham was mocking, and she said to Abraham, get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac. The matter distressed Abraham greatly, because it concerned his son. And he's speaking of Ishmael there, because he loved Ishmael also. But God said to him, don't be distressed about the boy and your slave woman. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it's through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. I will make the son of the slave into a nation also, because he is your offspring. So the next morning, Abraham gets up and he sends Hagar and Ishmael on their way. And they think that Ishmael's about 17 years old at that point. So just for reference of keeping the storyline, they think Isaac's about 3 and that Ishmael is about 17 when he sends them on their way. So as heartbreaking as this scene is to watch Hagar and Ishmael, because it breaks my heart, I feel sorry for them, but as heartbreaking as it is, God does agree that it's the right thing to do for the health of the situation. Not only could it cause problems over the inheritance passing to Isaac at Abraham's death, but it's more than likely not even a healthy situation mentally for all of them either. As you can probably imagine, all being, around each other all the time. God does encourage Abraham to listen to Sarah, and he reiterates that he will bless Ishmael because he is Abraham's offspring. Well, Hagar and Ishmael end up running out of water as they're wandering in the desert, and God hears the cry. He hears the cry, and if you remember, that's what Ishmael means, is God hears, if y'all remember that. And he opens Hagar's eyes to see a well of water. And then scripture goes on to say that God was with the boy as he grew up. So I wanted y'all to hear that story because I want you to see that he was completely faithful to all of them, to every single one of them. He was faithful and true to his word to Abraham, to Sarah and Isaac, and to Hagar and Ishmael. Do y'all see that? So even though they had to be sent away and he agreed with that, he was faithful to them. And he was true to his word. And that's a big thing, is we've got to know that he's faithful in his word and in his promises. Galatians 4:22 and 23 reads, for it is written that Abraham had two sons, one by a slave woman and the other by the free woman. His son by the slave woman was born according to the flesh, but his son by the free woman was born as the result of a divine promise. So Ishmael, the son born according to the flesh, is the son who is born according to the will of man. And if you remember, it was out of self-reliance, right? Not trusting God and trying to help him out, right? Got impatient and relied on themselves to help God, because, he ain't big enough to get it done on his own. That's what we do when we take it on ourselves, is we're saying, we don't trust you. We're going to help you out. That's what we do. So that's Ishmael, born out according to the flesh, out of self-reliance. And then on the other hand, Isaac is born out of the will of God, the son born of the will of God. And that contrast there between Ishmael and Isaac depicts salvation, in that there are those who believe that by obeying the law, they can save themselves. Y'all see that? Kind of like the Tower of Babel. Remember, they was going to build the Tower of Babel to the heavens, on their own. They was going to achieve that. Same thing. People that think they can obey the law and achieve that on their own, in their own will. But Galatians teaches us that the true children of Abraham are those born by miraculous means. Miraculous means by the will of God himself. So salvation is the gift given to us through faith by the Holy Spirit. We can't earn it and we can't achieve it. We can't build up to it, right? Not in our own. It's a miraculous, divine birth. So chapter 21 ends saying that Abraham stayed in the land of the Philistines for a long time. So we know that, time passed, and then chapter 22 opens saying sometime later. So quite a bit of time passed, and then that was chapter 22 is when God tested Abraham. Don't panic. I'm not going to rehash the story of Abraham and Isaac again, but y'all should know by now that this is not Abraham's first test, was it? No. It wasn't. So he had faced test after test with God saying, do you trust me? Do you trust me? Right? Test after test. Do you trust me? And God earlier on asked Abraham to leave Ur. That was one of the, that initial first test. And wanting him to let go of the past, to leave that place, leave his family, leave his past behind. But this test in chapter 22 was the hardest of all. Asking him to give his son of promise, his everything, letting go not only of the past, but of his future, right? Letting go of everything, even his future. So God always asking him to lay something on the altar and trust him with it. That's what he's asking. Laying it on that altar of sacrifice, and it's not an altar of sacrifice if it don't cost you something, right? And that heavy lifting of trusting God, when you lay that down and it costs you something and it hurts somewhat, heavy lifting, using that faith muscle. So the test here in chapter 22 is a foreshadowing. I haven't mentioned this, but I know most of y'all already know it, more than likely, but it's a foreshadowing. We see the willingness of a father to sacrifice his son. We see the son under a death sentence for 3 days. We saw the illustration of a substitute sacrifice through the ram, and then that substitute being provided by God. So y'all see all that foreshadowing there. I wanted to read Romans 8:32. Says, "He who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also, along with him, graciously give us all things?" If he would give up his son for us, why wouldn't he give us all things? Why don't we trust him in that? Because he is a provider and a supplier of all our needs. In Genesis 22:19, Abraham and Isaac returned to the servants after this beautiful, dramatic, moment that happened there. And I feel like that should have been the end of the chapter. I mean, the curtains are to close there, and it should have been the end of the chapter. But instead, we get this weird little section at the end of chapter 22, where we're told about the offspring of Milcah, Abraham's brother Nahor's wife. And of course, there's a reason that it's there, because it's setting us up for what's about to come. And in verse 23, it says, Bethuel fathered Rebekah. So believe it or not, those generational lists, a lot of times, they're actually something you can get out of those. They're there for a reason. And this is letting us know that Rebekah, Abraham's great niece, is about to enter the scene, and she's of significance to us. So Genesis 23, we come to Sarah's death. In verses 1 and 2, it tells us that she lived to be 127 years old, and she died in the land of Canaan. And Abraham went to mourn for Sarah and to weep over her. And this is the only time that it's recorded that he cried, that he wept. And we read in that passage that he pays an outrageous amount. So he pays this expensive price to have her buried in a particular field, in a cave at the end of this particular field, which is in the land of Canaan. In the land of Canaan. So why is that significant that he would purchase that in Canaan? I'll just tell you, I'll give you a hint. Because it would have been their practice for them to have went back to the homeland and be buried in your homeland. That was the practice in the time. So the normal practice would have been to have taken her back to Ur in Mesopotamia and buried her there, but he didn't. He paid this big price for this cave in Canaan to bury her there. Why would that be? Why is that? This is why this is in here. This is why, everything in the scriptures, something you're supposed to get out of it, right? So why is that significant?
Because that was God's promised land to his people.
Exactly. So Abraham's so committed, right, to staking his claim to the land that the Lord has promised in Canaan, that he would bury his wife there in expectation and faith that it would one day belong to his family line, and that he would be buried there too. All right, on to Genesis chapter 24, and if y'all like a love story, this one's good. This one's a good one. So Genesis 24, 1 through 4, Abraham was now very old, and the Lord had blessed him in every way. He said to his senior servant in his household, the one in charge of all he had, "Put your hand under my thigh. I want you to swear by the Lord, that the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you will not get a wife from my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I'm living, but you will go to my country and my own relatives and get a wife for my son Isaac." So for those of you like me that was like, why is he putting his hand on? That don't even make sense. I was like, I don't get it. Why is he making an oath, putting his hand under his thigh? But it's actually a polite, indirect reference to the covenant of circumcision. That's what that is. So he's essentially saying, swear to me by the covenant that you'll do what I'm asking. A recurring theme that I wanted y'all to sort of understand, because you'll see several times in Genesis that you don't want to marry a Canaanite. And I don't know if y'all know why. But Ham was one of Noah's sons, and the Canaanites were from the line of Ham. And Noah cursed the line of Ham in Genesis chapter 9, if you want to go back and read that. But that's why it was frowned upon, is a mild word probably, that you shouldn't marry a Canaanite. And so Isaac must marry a woman from the line of Shem, Noah's son, the blessed son of Noah. He had 3 sons, and Isaac must marry a woman from the line of Shem, just like that Abraham's from. And if Isaac goes back to that original family group, there will be a perfect alignment of 2 sides of the family tree coming from that faithful line of Shem. Verses 5 through 14 goes on to say, the servant asked him, "What if the woman is unwilling to come back with me to this land? Shall I then take your son back to the country you came from?" "Make sure that you don't take my son back there," Abraham said. "The Lord, the God of heaven, who brought me out of my father's household and my native land, and who spoke to me and promised me an oath, saying, 'To your offspring I'll give this land,' he will send his angel before you, so that you can get a wife for my son from there. If the woman is unwilling to come back with you, then you will be released from this oath of mine. Only don't take my son back there." So the servant put his hand under the thigh of his master Abraham and swore an oath to him concerning this matter. Then the servant left, taking with him 10 of his master's camels, loaded with all kinds of good things from his master. He set out from Aram Naharaim and made his way to the town of Nahor. He had the camels kneel down near the well outside the town. It was toward evening, the time the women go out to draw water. Then he prayed, "Lord, God of my master Abraham, make me successful today and show kindness to my master Abraham. See, I'm standing beside this spring, and the daughters of the townspeople are coming out to draw water. May it be that when I say to a young woman, 'Please let down your jar that I may have a drink,' and she says, 'Drink, and I'll water your camels too,' let her be the one you have chosen for your servant Isaac. By this I'll know that you have shown kindness to my master." So who else besides me likes this servant? I do, right? First thing he does is go to the Lord in prayer. That's my kind of man. You know what I mean? I like him. Verses 15 and 16 goes on to say, before he had finished praying, Rebekah came out with her jar on her shoulder. She was the daughter of Bethuel, son of Milcah, who was the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor. The woman was very beautiful. And guess what happens? She does exactly that what he has prayed to be the case. Exactly what he had prayed. She waters all 10 camels. So in case y'all don't know, like, what a workload that is, they drink about 20 gallons apiece. So that's about 200 gallons, and the jar that they draw with holds about 3 gallons. So we're talking about a bunch of draws, and we ain't talking about just putting the jar under the kitchen sink either. They think that you would have had to went down into the well and drew the water. So that's a lot of work, a lot of work and a lot of sweat. So all the servant asked of her was for a drink for himself. That's all he asked. And then she offered to do this great big task on herself. So how many people do y'all know that when you ask them to do something, they go above and beyond what's asked of them? And I'll just leave that right there. You know what I mean? Like, most times you'd be lucky if they do what you ask, and that's it. You know what I mean? So, but I wanted y'all to see the character of Rebecca there. She's not just a pretty face. She's not just a pretty face. She's strong. She's hard working. She's willing. I want y'all to see that. So drop down to verses 22 through 27. When the camels had finished drinking, the man took out a gold ring weighing a beka and 2 gold bracelets weighing 10 shekels. Then he asked, "Whose daughter are you? Please tell me, is there room in your father's house for us to spend the night?" She answered him, "I am the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Milcah that bore to Nahor." And she added, "We have plenty of straw and fodder, as well as room for you to spend the night." Then the man bowed down and worshiped the Lord. I like him even better already. He bowed down and worshiped the Lord, saying, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not abandoned his kindness and faithfulness to my master." Do y'all see? It's not just Abraham's God. God is this servant's God too. Do y'all see that? It's not just Abraham's God, it's his God too. And I wanted y'all to catch that. Praise be to the Lord who is kind and faithful. Oh, he just proves faithful over and over and over. And I like how, like, even before he finished praying, I know that don't get to happen most of the time. You know, it seems like that's not always the case. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it is, because it was thought that, like, when he started praying, Rebecca would have already been on her way. So God was already working before he even prayed, right? How many times can I can tell you a couple of stories probably now that I know that God's working, and I know he started working on it before I even ask him. Like, I ask him something and I can see it coming to fruition, and I can see that he was actually working on it even before that. So anyway, so faithful. So Rebecca runs back to tell her mother's household about all these things, really excited. And we're introduced to her brother Laban, or Laban. I don't know which way you want to say it, but we'll say Laban because we actually adopted a little boy from Africa for Feed the Hunt, and his name is Laban. That's what we call him, is Laban. Anyway, so go ahead and remember that name as we get the first hint of his character, where it says in verse 30, as soon as he saw the ring and the bracelets on his sister's arms, he hurries out to the man at the spring, to the servant. So as soon as he's seen that, so y'all can see he's already like seeing dollar signs. That's a woo, somebody out there wealthy, you know. That's what he's already seeing dollar signs. So stick a pin in Laban as you'll hear that name again. But anyway, it goes on to say that Laban says, "Come, you who are blessed by the Lord." So he's real interested in how blessed they are. So they go back to the house, and the servant recounts that whole story of how God confirmed that Rebecca is the one. He recounts the whole story. And in verse 51, they agree. The household agrees to let her become the wife of his master's son as the Lord directed. However, the next morning, Mama gets involved. I think that's funny because I relate. But anyway, so the next morning, it goes from mentioning the daddy and the brother, and then now all of a sudden it's the brother, and Mama has decided that, can't you just wait 10 days first? Just wait 10 days. Give me 10 days with her before you take her way, way, way over there in Canaan, So anyway, there's some hesitation in letting Rebecca go. So they decide to ask Rebecca. Let's just ask Rebecca if she wants to go. And in verse 58, they ask her, will you go with this man? And without hesitation, Rebecca replies, I will go. I will go. And we begin to see a picture of the church here. I did not know that before studying this. A bride who willingly goes to be with the bridegroom. The family speaks a familiar blessing over Rebecca before she leaves in verse 60. Our sister, may you become thousands of 10,000s, and may your offspring possess the gate of those who hate him, which is exactly what the Lord said to Abraham after he asked him to sacrifice Isaac and delivered him back from life. So that's tying together Isaac and the bride that would achieve that promise for the house of Abraham, tying them together. In verse 61 through 67, Rebecca and her attendants get ready, mount the camels, and went back with the servant. So the servant took Rebecca and left. Now Isaac had come from Beer-lahai-roi, for he was living in the Negev. He went out to the field one evening to meditate, which means to pray. So he's in this field praying. And some people suggest the words more of a lament, which is, I won't say complaining, but and as he looked up, he saw camels approaching. Rebecca also looked up and saw Isaac. She got down from her camel and asked the servant, who is that man in the field coming to meet us? He is my master, the servant answered. So she took her veil and covered herself, which is an example of Rebecca displaying manners and modesty there. Then the servant told Isaac all he had done. And Isaac brought her into the tent of his mother Sarah, and he married Rebekah. So she became his wife, and he loved her. So Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. I like that story. That's kind of like maybe the first love at first sight story. I don't know, but it's like love at first sight. But we see that Rebekah takes the place of Sarah in the household, and that's signified by Isaac taking her into his mother's tent. Real quick, wanted to circle back to the foreshadowing with the bride and the bridegroom that just played out with Abraham, Isaac, a servant, and Rebekah. So we had a father, and he has a son who was prophesied or, brought by a miraculous birth, mind you, and then delivered from death to life. Then a servant is sent to find a bride for the son, and it's thought that the servant pictures for us the work of the Holy Spirit, delivering a bride who was in the clutches of a deceiver. And we have the bride, the church, who responds willingly that she will go. I'm not sure if that was, God's true intention in that story or not, but I think it is an interesting idea to chew on. It could definitely be a possibility. But I read that and I thought that was pretty neat. So, not quite finished yet. I'm almost there. So we are at least to Genesis chapter 25. I know we're kind of a cleanup day. We're like getting all the little loose ends tied up on Abraham. But Genesis 25, we have another funeral. But first it begins with Abraham took another wife. Anybody besides me, eyes just rolled in the back of the line. I was like, you gotta be kidding me. Abraham, come on. Anyway, so.
It was only 127.
She was, yeah.
137.
Okay, so he takes another wife, and whose name is Keturah, and she bore him 6 sons. And I want y'all to listen to the names of the sons: Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. So why on earth is that even there? Because it's telling you another list of the enemies of Israel. Right? Born out of wrong, not the promise, right? Right? Y'all recognize Midian, I would assume, at least. Right? So, and then verses 5 and 6 goes on to say, Abraham left everything he owned to Isaac. But while he was still living, he gave gifts to the sons of his concubines and sent them away from his son Isaac to the land of the east. And scholars say that Keturah was not really a wife, which made me feel better, because the translation suggested earlier that she was a wife. That concubine is actually a more accurate translation. Verses 7 through 11 go on to say that Abraham lived 175 years. Then Abraham breathed his last and died at a good old age, an old man and full of years, and he was gathered to his people. His sons, Isaac and Ishmael, buried him, both of them. Buried him in the cave of Machpelah near Mamre, the field of Ephron, son of Zohar the Hittite, the field Abraham had bought from the Hittites. And there Abraham was buried with his wife Sarah. After Abraham's death, God blessed his son Isaac. So as we're reading about the death of Abraham, I want y'all to keep a few things in mind. He lived in tents till he died. Lived in tents till he died. So Abraham, possessor of the land, who owns only a burial plot at the time of his death. The father of a multitude, that dies the father of one. There's an author who wrote of Abraham that he died clutching a handful of promissory notes. So for y'all young people that may not know what that is, it's basically like a handful of IOUs from God. So even though those promises, he died, he didn't get to see those finish coming to fulfillment. Verses 12 through 17 goes on to give an account of the family line of Abraham's son Ishmael, born out of the will of man, remember? Not out of the divine promise, out of the will of man. And then we get this list of all his descendants, which is 12, by the way. And then we see Ishmael die as well. So the father of an actual multitude at his death was Ishmael. He was the father of the multitude at the time of his death. Think what that might have been like for Abraham to see Ishmael's family line flourishing, but not Isaac's. To watch Ishmael's family flourish, knowing that legacy God promised to them. And that pattern continues through the life of Isaac until we get to Jacob, because it's Jacob who's the father of the 12 tribes of Israel. The family of God continues to be tempted with doubt for 2 generations, thinking, do we trust the promises of God? 2 generations. It's the 3rd generation before we get the 12 tribes on the divine promise birth. If you think about the way that Jesus spoke about the kingdom of heaven, he says, the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed. It's the smallest seed of all the seeds in the garden. But when it's planted, it grows into a tree that ends up filling the whole earth. From human perception, it may appear to not be flourishing. Might not be amounting to much when you're just staring at it like a pot of boiling, waiting on water to boil. But the plans of God go forward and the kingdom does come. Y'all want me to say that again? The plans of God does go forward and the kingdom does come. So do you trust him? Asking y'all, do you trust him? Or do you sometimes wonder if God is as good as is said about him? Do you trust him? Or do you look around and perceive that a promise is not flourishing or not amounting to much and begin to doubt, waver? I'm thankful for Abraham's example, whose faith was credited to him as righteousness. That's probably the biggest statement that you need to remember about Abraham. His faith was credited to him as righteousness. Matthew 1:1 reads, "This is the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham." It jumps from David to Abraham and mentions Abraham specifically. Talk about promises fulfilled, right?
Yes.
Might not have looked like much to Abraham at the time of his death, but the promise was fulfilled through Jesus. That little mustard seed that seemed to not amount to much grew and filled the whole earth. The whole earth. I also hope you took note today that faith is the vehicle to salvation. Faith is the vehicle to salvation. Faith clothes you in Jesus Christ's righteousness. No more our filthy rags. Faith clothes you in that righteousness. Born into the kingdom not by your own will or man's will, what you've achieved, but born of a divine promise. A divine promise. So my final statement to y'all today is, may faith be credited to you and me as righteousness. May it be credited to you as righteousness. Any questions or comments?
Well, right after he said that faith was counted to Abraham for righteousness, he goes on to say, not him only, but us also.
Yes. Right. All right. We're going to have a history lesson next Sunday. I think it would be wise for us to really understand the whole Ishmael thing, even to the point of maybe getting into the temple. And I don't know if y'all even know what I'm talking about. I know you do because we've talked about it. But anyway, have a little history lesson about Ishmael leading to all the way up to the temple, because who knows, we may see that come to pass. But anyway, all right, so that's what we'll do next Sunday, I think, unless the Lord changes direction. All right, y'all take 5.